moving. Okay, there we go. Had a delayed reaction there. Okay, folks, tonight's topic is government fiddles. Well, hold on a second. I'm still having problems with my slide advancement.
Greg, if you need me to, I can run the slides from this side, and you just tell me when to change.
Okay, it's.
Before we do that, Greg, just put your mouse in the slide, click it once, then hit your page down key. It's normally all you need to do. Put your mouse in the slide and click it.
Okay. All right. Tonight's presentation is Government Fiddles While the Economy Burns. We'll take out time for questions at the end if you have any. Hope you find what I'm talking about interesting. Also, more so than that, we hope, Tom, myself, and Chris, that you prepare for what apparently is the future of our country. So don't just look at this as an abstract history lesson, but as a call to arms, if you will, to do something about your finances to prepare. Okay, first let's discuss what is inflation. In the simplest terms, inflation is just the devaluation of currency. In more technical terms, it's the expansion of the nation's money supply. If you visualize a monopoly
We're not
game,
seeing the slides move yet.
Well, they're moving on my side now. It says screen sharing is paused. What does that mean? Something or?
Yeah, you need to put the cursor in one of the slides.
Okay, and which I've done.
Right, and click there.
Okay. You seeing anything move?
Not yet.
Okay, Greg, in the control panel, either on the left or...
It says on the control panel, screen sharing is now paused. What does that mean?
Okay, do you see the button that has an arrow inside of it, circular button with an arrow in the middle?
Yes.
Okay, click on that, and that will show your screen. That will put it in active mode. And it should turn into a pause sign.
Okay, it disappeared now.
Yep.
So do you see anything now?
Yes, yes, I now see your screen. It is now moving.
Okay. Okay. We just discussed what inflation is. If you think in terms of the money supply, think of a monopoly game. And it's nothing more than paper, but the bank has all of the money, and it continually hands it out as you pass go. Well, over time, as you keep playing the game, you know from experience from this childhood and sometimes adult game that the amount of cash keeps growing and growing. But there's still the exact same number of properties on the board. They didn't morph into 3 times as many properties just because you had more cash from pass and go. They're still the same number. So that's what we mean by the expansion of the money supply. It just continually keeps growing, but there's still the same number of assets. So obviously that means that it takes more money then to buy the same assets. That is true inflation. The most honest way of defining inflation is that it's really a tax. Because, why is it a tax? Because the government creates it by this continual printing of money. It's a hidden tax because you don't fill out a tax form every April 15th on the amount of the cost of living increases, but nonetheless, it's the most destructive tax because it destroys productivity. I want to give you a history lesson of United States money because not too many people know that the United States has been through some very challenging moments in its history. Most Americans would think the U.S. would never dishonor our currency and create a new one. But the fact of the matter is that the reality is the U.S. has had not just one currency, but not even two currencies, but three different currencies. If you were to ask 1,000 Americans this question, my guess would be that not one would get it right. So look at yourself as an elite member of knowledge that you are aware of this. The first U.S. hyperinflation began in the very beginning, literally moments after we became a nation, all the way in 1776 when we declared our independence. Shortly thereafter, we also declared our hyperinflation tendencies. Kind of interesting, isn't it? We declare our independence, and then the very first thing we do is hit the gas pedal on inflation. You're looking at the very first American money. It's called a continental dollar. It's a beautiful coin. It was made out of pewter, and you see continental currency written in the periphery in the date 1776, and then the 13 different colonies in the chain link on the back of the coin. Now, this is a major rarity today, and the coin you're looking at is worth $500,000. So it is treasured as a collector's item, but nonetheless, it was a product of American hyperinflation. Here's a paper version of the continental currency, and it even states in it that the bill entitles the bearer to receive $20 in gold or silver as redemption from this certificate of continental currency. Nonetheless, the continental dollar was replaced and devalued, and 100 continental dollars now equaled one new dollar. So how long did it take for us to experience hyperinflation? Now, that's hyperinflation when you talk about a 100-to-1 multiple. It only took a few short years. By 1791, the continental dollar was already finished, prompting one of America's great leaders, Thomas Jefferson, to make the following speech. A private central bank issuing the public currency is a greater menace to the liberty of the people than a standing army. We must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. You know, this is something that could have been from the Wall Street Journal last week. You think that we would have learned. Thomas Jefferson was obviously a genius. He wrote, of course, the Declaration of Independence, was a great leader, bought 1/3 of the nation from France in the Louisiana Purchase of 1803. So a great American leader, and he had the foresight to recognize that without a stable currency, our country was doomed. So he was concerned about having central banks controlling the currency. He thought it was greater risk than being attacked by a foreign nation. So he was concerned about the nation's leaders loading us up with perpetual debt. But that's exactly what is happening today. So what did Thomas Jefferson and his colleagues, the founding fathers of America, do to try to protect us? Well, they created the second U.S. money, the United States dollar. And this is the very first United States coin made. It's called a half dismy, which had the denominational value of 5 cents. This coin, through legend has it, was made with silver from George and Martha Washington's tea sets. This is supposedly, history believes, Martha Washington's bust on the front of the coin. And this coin that you're looking at is also a major collector's item, being worth $1.5 million. So a very important, desirable piece of American history. But what exactly did Thomas Jefferson and his colleagues do? Well, in 1792, they authored the U.S. Constitution. I thought I had a slide of it in there, but I don't. So in the U.S. Constitution, it states that the only lawful money is U.S. gold and silver. Very interesting fact that Thomas Jefferson and the other founding fathers recognized the failed experiment of paper unbacked money with the continental dollar. They were concerned about strong central banks and leaders who would spend us endlessly into debt, so they mandated that only lawful U.S. money should be gold and silver, and they dictated that $20 should be equal to 1 ounce of gold. This is actually a part of our Constitution and a part of the original documents that set up the U.S. Mint in 1792. So here we have $20 equal to 1 ounce of gold. Well, let's skip through history all the way up to 1933. During this time frame, from 1792 until 1933, the United States had a stable currency. $20 equaled 1 ounce of gold for this entire 140-year time frame. This was the best times of American history, the most solid financial times of American history, and the United States became the envy of the world as a result of its tremendous financial strength from being backed by gold and having a sound financial system. But in 1933, this all came crashing to an end as the most important date in U.S. financial history resulted in the unthinkable, with President Franklin Roosevelt actually making it illegal through felony for Americans to own their own money. This order signed by Roosevelt required that all Americans turn in all their money to the federal government. That's right, you were required to turn in your gold coins, your gold bullion, and any gold certificates, which were the $20 bills of the time, into the nearest bank. And if you didn't do so, you were punishable with a fine that would be, in today's dollars, the equivalent of $500,000 and up to 10 years in prison. So Roosevelt actually made it a felony to own our own money. How many of you know this happened in history? This is another one that probably not 1 in a million people know that this actually happened. Now, through Roosevelt's strong grip on Congress, they actually passed a series of resolutions that disconnected the United States government from the constitutional mandate that only gold and silver is lawful money. Now, if you're a history scholar or a constitutional scholar, you'll know that the Constitution cannot be amended by the President or Congress. That the only way this can happen is through a supermajority vote of the actual states. The actual states have to vote on any amendments to the Constitution. This didn't happen in 1933. It never happened. So if you're beginning to get this clearly, I'm telling you that what happened was an unconstitutional event. So what did Roosevelt do? Well, he made it illegal to own gold coins, gold certificates, but interestingly enough, he exempted rare gold coins. Recognizing that people collected coins, he exempted them. This is a picture you're looking at, is the first American gold coin made in 1795. Now, this coin is a great collector's item today, worth about $500,000. People like to own things from history, and it makes history come alive to be able to hold in your hands the things that I'm discussing with you tonight. Also, 1933 being an important date in history, gold coin made from 1933 is worth a tremendous amount of money. The last auction sale for a $20 gold piece from 1933 was $7.6 million. So again, these collector's items from these important dates in American history are very much revered. Now we're up to the third U.S. money. And this third U.S. money doesn't even list the United States as the top billing any longer. As you see here, the top line goes to the Federal Reserve. Now, what exactly is the Federal Reserve? Well, that's a whole subject of another seminar, maybe 2 or 3 of them, and I'll just suffice it to say that the Federal Reserve was created as a way to get around the constitutional mandate that only gold and silver was lawful money. You see, this $20 bill isn't backed by anything. It's what we call faith money. You see, once we had real money, and here is the gold certificate that was in circulation at the time Roosevelt ordered that you had to turn this $20 bill back into the government. It wasn't just gold that you were required to turn in, or gold coins. It actually mentioned gold bullion too. So even if the gold you owned wasn't an American-made gold coin and it was just a bar of gold, you were still required to turn that over to the government. So the government ordered all gold turned into them in all forms and all gold certificates. So this is what American money used to look like back in the 1800s and early 1900s up until 1933. It says, if you read from top to bottom, this certifies that there has been deposited in the Treasury of the United States of America $20 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. You see, now we have monopoly money. It doesn't even look like real money anymore. And what you just see the Federal Reserve note there, and no mention anywhere about what this thing is good for. So if you compare the two now, looking at them side to side, you can see that the early ones were quite clear in what this was. This was the equivalent of a bank statement. You see, the United States of America was your bank, and you held the certificate saying that the United States is holding $20 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. So think of your bank statement. You don't carry around a sack full of money. You have your bank statement that says you have so much money on deposit. Well, the United States was your bank in these days, and so you didn't have to carry around a pocket full of gold. You could carry around these gold certificates to evidence that you had money on deposit. Today's $20 bill doesn't say it's good for anything. It just says Federal Reserve note. Again, this will be a good educational study for you to see exactly what the Federal Reserve is. But let's see what the United States Treasury has to say about these two different notes you were looking at. Now, one of the notes we were just looking at is called a United States note. Remember, this United States note was the second currency. The first currency was the continental currency. The second was the United States currency. And now we're on the third, the Federal Reserve currency. So the question from the Treasury website is, what's the difference between a Federal Reserve note and a United States note? The answer, Federal Reserve notes receive no backing by anything. Now, this has been the case since 1933. The notes have they have no value for themselves. What they're saying is that it's just based on faith. As long as the next guy in line believes that that $20 bill you hand them to will be good for something, then it still works. The economy still works, and the faith game still works. You might as well be handing them monopoly money. As long as they believe that it's good for something, then they'll keep taking it. But once that confidence gets rocked, that's when the whole confidence faith game comes to a grinding halt and hyperinflation begins. You see, again, 1 in 10,000, maybe 1 in 100,000 people have never been told, hey, the Federal Reserve currency is not even lawful money. It was rammed through a Democratic-controlled government at a time in history when the American public was so cowed by the Great Depression and wowed by who FDR was that they didn't object as he just steamrolled the U.S. Constitution and illegally altered it to allow our currency to be replaced by the third American currency, the Federal Reserve currency. I firmly believe that Thomas Jefferson, had he been alive in 1933, would have staged a revolution or started a war among our government to lay down the law that you can't do this. Remember his quote from 1791, the fear that if a central bank ever got control of our money, that it would ruin the nation. Well, that's exactly what has happened. We have a central bank today that was established at the time that Franklin Roosevelt took us off the gold standard. So let's look at the overview. The Continental Dollar, the first American currency, 99% depreciation during its 16-year history. The U.S. dollar, 0% depreciation. Remember, in 1791, Thomas Jefferson looks at this situation of the Continental Dollar and says, we have to fix this, so we're going to write in the Constitution that gold and silver are the only legal money. And because of their wisdom, we had a sound system for 140 years until Franklin Roosevelt screwed it up permanently by violating the Constitution that was established by our founding fathers. History may debate whether this was the right or wrong thing to do to end the Great Depression, but there's no question that Roosevelt opened Pandora's box for future presidents to just completely abuse the concept of fiscal responsibility and spend us into the huge mess that we have today. As I said, the Constitution says it's the only gold and silver our money. The second most important date in U.S. financial history is 1971. What happened then was that President Nixon ended dollar convertibility. You see, in 1933, Roosevelt took us off the gold standard. Americans were not allowed to own gold anymore. However, however, our government still allowed foreign governments to settle accounts in gold with the United States. So if the United States owed money to France or Germany or other countries, it settled all of its debts in gold. This ended in 1971 with the Bretton Woods Agreement, where dollar convertibility would end. And the Bretton Woods Agreement took place in the 1940s, where it allowed for the dollar to still be converted into gold to settle debts. This ended in 1971 when Nixon determined that the amount of countries demanding gold was going to wipe out the U.S. Treasury, so he ended convertibility once and for all. Now, why were these nations demanding gold? Because they realized that their paper was soon going to be worthless. We next moved to the phase of government where we had a quasi-oil-backed dollar called the petrodollar. In return for accepting the U.S. dollar as the new world reserve currency, the Middle East agreed to price oil in dollars. This gave the United States the unique ability to be able to run with significant amounts of significant amounts of overspending without creating enormous inflation. Why? Because other nations around the world were forced to accept the dollar as the world reserve currency because of the deal we cut. Because oil being priced in dollars allowed the United States to continue to let the printing presses roll and roll. as the world reserve currency today, the United States has so abused its position that there are now frequent and loud calls from different corners of the world that we need a new world reserve currency to replace the United States one, because the United States has abused its leadership position and has printed so many dollars that it is weakening the value of each one. You see, 10% of the world's nations have already experienced some form of hyperinflation. This is a significant number. What makes us think that it won't happen here? Well, it's already happened once. That's the hard fact truth. And our leaders recognized that we needed to do something about that to prevent it from happening again. Hence, they created our Constitution. What are we going to do this time? You see, hyperinflation is a difficult thing to deal with. This is an example of a 500 million mark note from Germany in 1923. A lot of money there to buy a loaf of bread. Quickly replaced, though, by the 5 billion mark notes, and they went out of date so fast they couldn't even get off the printing presses before they had to be sent back through for a denomination 20 times higher at 100 billion marks. Here's what happened to a loaf of bread in Germany in 4 years, from a quarter of a mark up to 80 billion marks. This is not a unique situation. Other countries around the world have done the same thing. You see, I took a tour of Germany, and the tour guide pointed out that Germany was saddled with enormous war reparations as a result of losing World War I. Germany couldn't repay the huge war debts that had been forced down on them at the Treaty of Versailles. So what did Germany do? It just hyperinflated the currency, to which the tour guide noted, yes, Germany paid all of its debts in full, but with the equivalent value of $18. Zimbabwe has had huge inflation too, 2 million plus %. You're looking at the largest banknote in history, the $100 trillion note. That's a whole lot of zeros, and try to see how much that gets you, about the equivalent of one Coke. So very interesting currency to look at. Hyperinflation is coming to the United States. You may not believe it, you may not see it in everyday living. I'm about to explain to you why you don't see it in everyday living, because it seems like just the opposite is taking place. If anything, it seems like prices are going down. But looks are deceiving. The national debt has exploded. Look at how low it was through the decades of the 50s and 60s. It barely moved. We had responsible government that did not overspend. Then, starting in the early 70s, we got our first dose of what we call liberal spending with Lyndon Johnson's Great Society plans, where he started ramping up the mega spending. And then Republican presidents came in after him and really hit the accelerator. So I can't point the finger at Democrats, because the biggest overspenders to date have actually been Republicans. Today, we stand at a staggering $13 trillion. It's going up so fast that this chart is outdated already, as we stand at $13 trillion. Now, how much money is that? Well, that works out to about $40,000 for every living person in America. Now, I don't mean every adult. I mean every living person. That's every man, every woman, every baby, every kid, $40,000 per person. The average person doesn't have 40 grand. So what is going to happen to close this gap? The worst, believe it or not, is still to come. If you think 13 trillion sounds horrendous, it's just a fly speck to what's coming. Now, these numbers you see here are not being published by some radical right-wing group trying to scare people. No, these numbers actually come from our own government. that are stating that we are going to be overspending by trillions of dollars. This year alone that we're in right now, our nation's deficit is the biggest in history at a staggering $1.6 trillion. We had total income this year of $2.3 trillion, total expenses of $3.9, leaving a monumental gap of $1.6 trillion. That's not just a slight bit off. We're off by 50%. How in the world are we going to close a gap like that from $2.3 trillion to $3.9? I mean, that's just an incredible gap. People don't realize how big it is. And all they focus on are the silly sound bites of our government, such as Obama saying that we're going to convene a bipartisan group to try to cut the budget, and they come forth with a couple of ideas of how to save $100 million. You know, that's like you trying to worry about saving a penny. It's a joke. We are so far out of balance that the problem is unsolvable. Let's move further and see what current people have to be saying about this. The government knows that disaster is coming, but unfortunately there's no political will to stop it. Now, what do I mean by that? The warning bell has been sounded by numerous top government officials. The Congressional Budget Office is part of our government. It's a nonpartisan group of Republicans and Democrats that are tasked with the job of projecting the short-term spending of our nation. And they do this not with the eye of trying to slant the numbers, but with the eye of trying to present it as fairly as possible. They have stated that the debt level will reach 82% of the entire economy by 2019, threatening U.S. financial stability. That's a pretty scary statement. I don't know what to do, but it looks like we've got some serious problems coming. Now, who is John Bonner? Well, he is the top Republican in the House of Representatives, and he has said how many alarm bells have to be set off before Washington Democrats get serious about tackling dangerous budget deficits. With all due respect, outgoing President Bush was the biggest offender in history with deficits, so I don't think the Republicans have any right to point any fingers. And instead, we should be talking about getting together on both sides of the aisle to solve this problem. Judd Gregg is the senior Senate leader on the U.S. Budget Writing Committee, and he is stating this is clearly a scenario where the country is going to go bankrupt. Now, this isn't some commentator. This isn't Rush Limbaugh. This is the top leader of the U.S. Senate who sits and writes the budget of America. So these are people who know what's going on. Peter Orszag, now who is he? He is the top Democratic official that's ahead of the United States Budget Office in the branch of the White House that manages our government. He's obviously knows what's going on and has stated that we are on an utterly unsustainable fiscal course. Now, Tom and I note rather suspiciously that this is a young man who is the budget director of the United States, part of the Obama team, and he just resigned. And we can't help but wonder if it's for having made this statement because the Obama administration is trying to say that everything will be fine, yet his budget director is saying that we're on a collision course. And Obama does not want to address this. Now, who is this guy? He is the head of the Federal Reserve. Now, if you recall, we're on our third U.S. money now, and we call this money Federal Reserve notes. So this guy is the one in power who actually is the one who who's responsible for the creation of these notes that you're in your wallet. And he says the U.S. government has a technology called a printing press that allows it to produce as many U.S. dollars as it wishes at essentially no cost. What's he trying to tell you? Well, you're playing fool if you think that this game is going to last forever. Now, he just made this statement a few weeks ago. In a speech before Congress, the federal budget appears to be on an unsustainable path. Now, this is the same quote that I just gave you a moment ago from the head of our government's budget director of the White House. I'm sorry, so the White House budget director. Now, Ben Bernanke was appointed by President Obama to serve as the head of the Federal Reserve. So we have two officials that were appointed by Obama who are both saying that the federal budget appears to be on an unsustainable path. And these people are both at the top of the government who know what's going on. Now, if you read the news, you'll probably know that just recently there was deadly rioting in Greece. Why? Because Greece was in danger of defaulting, and Germany was forced to come to aid to provide money. And the Greeks actually were rioting over the requirements that were forced upon them to receive the money. Think of it this way, that you're out walking down the street and a beggar comes up to you and you hold out a $20 bill to give it to him and say, now, if you want this $20 bill, you're going to have to spend this $20 bill in a certain manner. You can't go out and buy liquor with it. You can't go to a bar. You can't go to a nightclub. You can't buy cigarettes. You have to buy food for it to sustain yourself. Now, imagine him arguing or fighting with you, saying, well, I want to decide how I'm going to spend my own money. And you say, well, wait a minute, I'm giving this to you. Well, that's exactly what's going on in Greece. You might think, how dare they sit there and riot over how they're being ordered to spend money that's given to them. Well, the irony of this is that can't be lost by this statement from just a few weeks ago from Alan Greenspan. Now, who is he? Alan Greenspan is the most recent chairman of the Federal Reserve, who was just replaced when he retired by the current one, Ben Bernanke. So he is also one of the world's top financial experts who is head of the Federal Reserve, the people who make our money. And this quote was from his article in the Wall Street Journal. If you'd like the entire Wall Street Journal article where he gave this quote from, we have that saved, and you're more than welcome to it. All you have to do is email or call us, and we'll send it to you. He said the current federal debt explosion is being driven by an inability to stem new spending initiatives. In other words, to get the Fed speak out of the way, he's saying that the government debt is exploding because there's no willpower to stop spending. Now, why is there no willpower to stop spending? Well, that's because the voters want it that way. He goes on to say we cannot grow out of these fiscal pressures. Now, what does he mean by that? He means that the productivity of the United States can never grow fast enough to get out of this mess. We can't create enough new jobs. We can't mint enough new millionaires to tax to collect enough income from to grow out of this mess. He is saying that it's impossible to close this gap between the current expenditures and the current income. He said that the solution is only politically toxic cuts or rationing of Medicare or significant inflation can close the deficit. So what is he talking about here? We've got this problem. Our income is $2.3 trillion. Our expenses are 3.9. How can we close this gap? Okay, option one, we can cut our spending. Okay, but he says that's politically impossible, which is exactly what I said earlier, that there's no political will to do it. Or we can ration medical care, which there's no political will for that either. As a matter of fact, we're doing just the opposite. We're pushing that pedal to the metal and going to be pushing through universal health care to make it even higher. So he quotes, the last option is significant inflation is the only way to close that gap. Remember, how did Germany solve the problem of having a debt they could not pay? They just ramped up the numbers on the currency and paid it off to the equivalent of $18. Now, two big countries in the world are dealing with these problems in a similar way, in a different way rather. The United Kingdom just elected a new government a few weeks ago, and what did that new government did? It promptly slashed government spending tremendously, increased the variety of taxes, and said that it is intent on closing its gap between the huge gap between income and expenses. The United Kingdom has a similar problem, albeit smaller, to the United States, in that it's got a huge gap between income and expenses. So it's cutting expenses and trying to raise income, which is the only sensible solution to this. It's the same thing you'd do if you were trying to solve your own financial dilemma of having a big gap between expenses and income. How did the United States respond? By criticizing Britain's newly elected government for embracing an austerity program and instead suggesting that that's not the way out of this, but that we should actually increase spending. If you can believe it, the United States government, headed by Obama, has actually told the United Kingdom in a speech just a few weeks ago that we need to actually spend even more money and print even more money and have another round of stimulus checks. They are clearly out to lunch. But is that really the case? Well, look who is calling the shots. Is Obama really doing something that the American people don't want? No, the answer is the American people want a free lunch. The stimulus crowd has a majority vote. You see, let's go all the way back to 1791 when Thomas Jefferson, the founding fathers, were setting up the U.S. Constitution. At that time, only property owners were allowed the right to vote. Why was it set up that way by the founding fathers? Because they knew that people who didn't own property would vote in ways that were not for the overall good of the government. Well, unfortunately, today, the vast majority of people voting are looking for a free lunch. They're looking for a handout. The vast majority of people are not looking for austerity. Look at the model of what's going on in Greece with rioting over being ordered to be austere. They want the free lunch. Greenspan, in his article in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks back, makes that point quite clear. So clear that the article, if you choose to get it off the Wall Street Journal, is entitled Comparing Greece with the United States. That's right. Greenspan actually correlates and connects the United States to Greece by saying that we are a free lunch society that wants that, and we're voting those people in, and it's going to end with a total collapse. Now, when does he predict this is going to happen? As soon as next year. You see, here's the problem. Right now, we've got this huge gap, but we can manage it. How can we manage it? Because interest rates are at an historic low. So we've got this gigantic gap, but we're able to make it work because interest rates are so low. Greenspan says that the problem is about to hit a wall because our hyper spending is increasing at a geometric rate. As a result, our amount of spending cumulatively is growing so big that there's nobody in the world left with pockets deep enough to lend us the money. So that's why he believes that by next year at the latest, the United States will run into a problem where it will no longer be able to find anybody anywhere in the world to finance this massive debt that we have. And you see, for years, we've been able to finance this massive debt we've had that's been growing, but it's reached hyper levels, and the amount of money that's available in the world to lend to us is closing in on reaching maximum level. So it's, in other words, like you've got your credit card and you can go wild spending, but eventually you're going to hit your debt ceiling or your credit limit. Well, that's what the United States is about to do. It's about to hit its credit limit, and Greenspan speculates that we'll hit our credit limit by next year. And he has analyzed the available money supply in the world from various wealthy nations that can continue to keep lending money to the United States as we have the most debt in the world, and feels that we will run out of available sources of new credit by next year. This is really quite sad that the United States has gone from the world's greatest wealthy nation to the world's greatest beggar nation as we have to scour the world looking for more money. Currently, Treasury Secretary Geithner travels the world preaching how sound American money is because he's been told by Obama to go out there and beat the drums and find more places to borrow money. That's what his job has been reduced to. He's traveling the world trying to find where can I find new places to borrow money to keep our insatiable drug habit going further of all this spending. Gold is the only true money as recognized back in 1792. You must protect your family. The government is not going to protect us. Unfortunately, the government is not going to protect us because the people don't want it. The average person wants a free lunch, and the average person doesn't have any wealth to protect. He just wants a free lunch. You have wealth. You have to protect yourself because no one else is going to do it for you. You've seen that the government has just swept out our constitutional mandate that only gold is money. It was done illegally. We presently have an illegal currency in place. This is not my comments, my opinion, but several of our elected leaders in the House of Representatives have given speeches on this subject, including Ron Paul of Texas, who ran for president in the last electoral cycle, that is preaching that the United States government is bankrupt and is presently running in receivership through the Federal Reserve. Now, it's a significant situation to look at, and I believe that we should take Greenspan's call to action seriously, that the United States is going to run out of sources to borrow money by next year. Now, Greenspan says that when that happens, when we run out of money, that what we will be forced to do is resort to opening the printing presses. That is the moment of truth when hyperinflation takes place. That's what happened in Germany. That's what happened in Zimbabwe. That's what happened in Argentina. That's what's happened in 10% of the world's countries. When they can no longer borrow money to service their debts, they resort to the last course of action that a country is forced to do in that situation, and that is print their way out of it. And when that happens, hyperinflation begins. So, when do I believe hyperinflation is coming? It could very well be in a matter of months. Protect yourself, and I'll open up the floor for questions now. If Tom, you have any comments you want to add, you can take it from there.
Greg, thank you for all of what you just shared. Tom, I'm jumping in here just to shift gears for us, and I'll move out of the way and give you the floor in a second too. Greg, we really do appreciate your comments. So, you know, one thing that comes to mind on all of this, it is true that it seems like so much of the American public is asleep. aside from taking care of our own families and doing what we know to do, how do you feel that people can be awakened? What steps are you taking with those around you?
Well, I think that the statements that we quoted, all these various government leaders are making, is clear that they're trying to sound the alarm bells. We've got the budget director of the United States, the Federal Reserve Chairman, the former Federal Reserve Chairman, the head of the Budget Writing Committee in the Senate, the House Republican leader, all sounding the alarm bells. It's just that most people just have their head in the sand. That's frankly the truth of it. They just have their head in the sand because they only can see day-to-day living. They can't see the coming collapse because they don't understand the big picture. They don't understand how big the gap is. They think, okay, yes, so we got a budget deficit, everybody's got one, but they don't understand how big it is, how big the gap is. It's not, a lot of time people hear these numbers, okay, we got $1 trillion deficit, but it doesn't relate to anything. They can't even think of what the heck is $1 trillion. That's why I just tried to explain it in practical terms. 2.3 coming in, 3.9 going out. How can you possibly close a gap that big? And Greenspan says that it can't be done. So as a result, the only way out is to borrow the money. But wait a minute, there's a problem. There's nobody in the world who's got the money. So what are we going to do then? And he said, well, then we'll just have to print the money. So he said that we'll still always have the money available to take care of this gap. It's just that it'll have to be printed. And once we hit that point of desperation, that's the moment when hyperinflation begins. So Greenspan noted in the same article, don't be fooled into complacency, into thinking that because the present moment appears to have no inflation. He said hyperinflation can come out of nowhere. He actually said that. You need to get the whole article and read it thoroughly. But he said it can come out of nowhere, and that's what he's predicting as soon as next year. So maybe he's wrong in his timetable, but it's obvious that it's inevitable. So it's not a matter of if this is going to happen, it's just when. Is it next week, next month, next year, or is it going to take 3 years to happen? It's definitely going to happen soon because the Congressional Budget Office estimated by 2019 our debt will reach 82% of the total economy, which is the point of being totally unsustainable at that juncture.
Well, one of the reasons I think, this is Tom, one of the reasons I think a lot of times people have their head in the sand is because they just don't want to believe this. It's just too horrendous, so they just would rather not believe it because it's not something that feels good, but it's a fact. Greg mentioned, people don't have a concept of what a trillion is. I was talking to a fellow the other day. I happened to be standing there next time I was at a coin show in Orlando, and a young man was there, a very young man. He was writing a first check he'd ever written. It had check number 101 on it. And the guy says, "This is your first check?" And the kid said, "Yeah, my very first check." And I commented to the man, I said, I remember when I was a teenager, every time I wrote a check for over $100, I used to get a headache. It was just a psychological thing. I remember not too many years ago when our legislators would talk about spending bills for $1 billion, people would get upset. Now we have $1 trillion spending bills, and we think nothing of it. But just to put it in perspective, I did the math on it. If you took $1 trillion in dollar bills and stacked them up, it would go all the way to the moon and back, and go back 1/3 of the way to the moon again. That's how much $1 trillion is. It's just an unfathomable amount of money. And we just spent $1.2 trillion is what they tell us that the health care bill will cost. Of course, every one of these omnibus spending bills end up costing 3 and 4 and 5 and sometimes 10 times what they tell us they'll spend. Medicare, LBJ told the American people was going to cost every American family $1.50 per month. Right now, the unfunded liability of Medicare is at about $500,000 per American family. So don't believe what the politicians tell you. But I think that the most sound wisdom we can get out of everything is what's on your screen right now, and it's what the Word of God tells us, Proverbs. Be sensible and store up precious treasures. Don't waste them like the fools do. We've talked about this many times in these webinars. We have a responsibility to our families, to our churches and our brothers and sisters, but also there's going to be a lot of people that don't prepare and that are going to be hurting. There's going to be people that are literally homeless and starving that haven't prepared, and I believe that in many of us, God has called us to be Josephs and to prepare and have enough for our families and our friends and our neighbors and the people in our churches, and have extra to help out other people and to be able to bless them in these terrible times that we don't want to talk about, we don't want to think about, but that are coming.
Tom, you know, one thing that comes to mind, we may not have time to address this tonight, but at some point I think it would be useful to have a little bit of discussion as far as what are practical steps that people can do to prepare. I hear this question all the time. You know, if you talk to somebody who's been through something like a Hurricane Katrina, I remember in my own experience Hurricane Frederick in Mobile, Alabama in '79. We were without electricity for almost 3 weeks. We were without water for almost 4 days, and we were without normal sewer services for almost a week and a half. And that really threw things into upheaval. You couldn't find gas. There was no way to pump the gas, even if there was gas. The grocery stores were closed. It was quite a scenario. So, you know, I'd like to just throw a request in that we talk practically about what people can do to get ready. And so anyway.
Well, that's a good idea, and we should do that. I just noticed on the screen that we actually have an incorrect web address on the screen, and so what I'd like you to do, tech support, if you would make me the presenter, please. And I'm just going to put the correct one up there real quickly. The one that's up there that says christianlink.com to look at the domain names. It's actually Christian Financial Concepts, the correct address. So I'm just putting the correct one up. If you give me just 1 second, I will share that. Am I the presenter now? Okay. All right. So that was the correct one in the middle there. If you would like to be on the list for webinars, one of the practical ways that you can prepare financially, I know what Chris was talking about, there was some sort of nuts and bolts things, but preparing financially would be to get your finances in order by at least having part of your net worth in gold, and that's something that Greg talks about every Tuesday night at 6 o'clock Eastern. The reason we do that earlier is because Greg is traveling Europe these days on treasure hunts, as he calls it, buying up investment grade gold over there, and so where he is, it's 2 o'clock in the morning when we start our Monday night call. So that's why we very seldom get an opportunity to have him. And by the way, Greg, thanks so much for being with us tonight. He had to get some sleep and then wake up again to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning to be on our call tonight. But his normal webinars are on Tuesday nights at 6 o'clock. And so if you'd like to be on the list for that, if you get the notifications for the Monday night webinars, but not the Tuesday night ones, just write to webinars@bellsouth.net, the address you see at the top of your screen there. And then to see the recordings of the webinars, many of them are posted at Christian Financial Concepts. The previous screen you saw up there is say christianlink.com. That is a correct website, but it's not where they're posted. So this is where you'd want to go. If they're not there, if there's one of the websites that you want to see, or one of the recordings you'd like to see, from either the Monday night conference calls where we have general investor education. We also have some of Greg's webinars from Tuesday nights. You'll find them at Christian Financial Concepts, and if they're haven't yet been posted, you can send an email to webinars@bellsouth.net, and we'll send you links to them. We're gradually getting them all posted there. Finally, Greg has written some really great research materials about the Federal Reserve System, about debt, and the subjects that we're talking about tonight. And so if you write an email to rarecoins@bellsouth.net, he'll be glad to send you any of that information. Michael says here, ignorance is truly bliss. When I broach this money issue with people, they label me a conspiracy theorist and a nut job. Would you like to comment on that, Greg?
Well, I think that a lot of people do react that way because they can't see. They look at the current weakness in housing prices and the glut of capacity, so that car prices are stable or going down, and they don't understand the big picture. You see, current events don't point to hyperinflation. If anything, it points in the opposite direction. But the thing is that current events don't understand the problem that is coming, and that is who is going to lend us the money to close this gap. And Greenspan says there isn't anybody left. That's why the Treasury Secretary is running around the world trying to scare up potential lenders with his roadshow to loan us money, because we're running out of people to close this gap. And that's what the problem is that how's this gap going to get closed? And so that's the issue that is coming up.
Sure. We've been bailing out nation after nation for decades, and there's nobody out there big enough to bail us out. Looks like this has to be the last question. Mash, who's from England, says, can you explain what will happen to everyday life experienced by ordinary citizens when we have hyperinflation?
Yeah, actually, we've got a real-world example of this in South America, because when Argentina went through this back in the 1980s, what happened is that employers had to pay, instead of the traditional weekly paycheck, had to give a twice-a-day paycheck, once at midday over the lunch hour, and then the second time at 5 p.m. at the close of the day. That's because of hyperinflation. By the difference between noon and 5 p.m., your currency was worth 10% less than it was at noon. So this way, people went out and scrambled on their lunch hour to spend the money in a hot potato type of ritual to see how fast they could turn that money into something of tangible value. So it put a lot of pressure on people as to how to deal with their finances, but this is what has happened with hyperinflation, and this is the example of one good example I've given you, but it's the one that has taken place in other places around the world as well.
Yeah, I mentioned I was just at a coin show in Orlando. Mesh, I have developed quite an interest in hyperinflation, and there was one person at this coin show that had old money from different countries. And he had several boxes of bills from Germany. And I spent about an hour going through these and picked out a whole bunch of it, spent a couple $100 on old bills from Germany. And it was fascinating going through, looking at the time before their hyperinflation started, like in 1918, and then seeing the rapid acceleration from 1919 and then 1920, 1921, and then looking at the dates the money was issued and the huge increases in the sizes of the bill. In 1919, it was 4 marks to the dollar. By the end of their, by the time everything just completely collapsed in 1923, 4 years later, it was 1.2 trillion marks to the dollar. And you can see the dates that they actually put the day, the month and the day that they issued the money, and you can see it jumping from the biggest note was, I think, a 100-mark note in 1919, and then it goes to 5,000 marks, then 10,000, 100,000, then a million marks, and then 5 million, and then 50 million, 100 million, just going up until I think the biggest was a 100 billion mark note. It was just amazing what happened to those poor people. And all because the government did exactly what our government's doing today, printing money backed by nothing.
Yes, it's so same exact scenario.
I'm planning on photographing all of these and putting them on a webinar one evening and calling it The Future of America, just letting people see graphically exactly the progression of what happened to Germany.
Yeah.
Anyway, on that cheerful thought, I guess we better wrap it up. Greg, I want to thank you all for
thank you all for listening. And I am going to be doing a more specific seminar tomorrow night at 6 p.m. And if you would like to listen to that, would like to have you. And if you have any questions at all that you didn't get answered tonight, then you're more than welcome to write us or call us, and we'll try to help you out with that.
Okay, excellent. And make sure you tune in next Monday night for another great webinar. We always have something interesting, and we'd love to have you on. Tell your friends about it. Spread the word, because we want to let people know that there are solutions out there. All right? Chris, thank you for hosting the call tonight. We appreciate it very much.
You bet, Tom. My pleasure.
All right.
Thank you.
We'll see you all next week. Good night. God bless you.